Well, good morning, everybody. This is Dan Sullivan. I'm the RVP for Condusiv Technology, and welcome to the webinar today to discuss eliminating downtime and how to boost performance for your MEDITECH environments. We've spared no expense today, folks, to have joining me on the webinar Gary Kwan. Gary, otherwise known as GQ, is our Senior Vice President of Technology Strategy and has spent decades working with MEDITECH customers, with MEDITECH, and with our technology and engineering teams to develop and deliver all of the enhancements and improvements in our software that helps MEDITECH environments. GQ, you out there?
Well, I am here, Dan, and thanks for the nice introduction. And in other words, I've been around for a little while here. In fact, with this company, I've been here for about 34, 35 years and been working closely with MEDITECH on this issue here. So I am the tech guy, and I'm here to keep the sales guy honest here. I'm glad to be with you on this, Dan.
Thanks, GQ, and you do keep me honest in these, so I appreciate that. Folks, what I do want to mention are two things. One, there's a Q&A box that you'll see, and want to make this as interactive as possible. No question is a bad one, and in doing these, GQ and I have had some great discussions and great questions from folks. So don't hesitate to put in your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll answer them either while we're going through the webinar or at the end. And also, in addition, what you'll be receiving as a result of attending today is a free NFR copy of our software to install in your environment. So it's a $525 value, so we appreciate your time and we value your time, but we also know what we do for MEDITECH environments, so we're excited to have you use and try us in your MEDITECH environment. And by the way, our software is even more beneficial on a non-MEDITECH Windows environments. We'll talk about that briefly during the presentation. So with that, I just want to spend a little bit here about who Condusiv is. So you may know us from our past history. We were the Diskeeper Corporation, and as Gary mentioned, he's been here 34 years. I think the company's been in business 37 years, the 12th oldest software company in the world. And we are all about, and Diskeeper had been about, in the preeminent disk defragmentation software product. But in 2012, as the world virtualized, you no longer defrag a SAN or an SSD. So GQ and his team totally respun that defragmentation software to where today we are two light filter drivers that sit in the Windows OS, and one prevents fragmentation from occurring in the Windows OS, and at the same time, GQ added a patented caching engine to our solution. And so for those read-intensive applications, this very intelligent, very smart caching engine will cache those I/O performance-robbing I/Os that degrade performance. It's very intelligent. It's fully automated. And we'll discuss that later in the presentation. But in doing so, our software eliminates at least 30% of the I/O moving to your back-end storage, improving application performance anywhere from 50 to 300%, and we'll talk about that. I mentioned our patented caching engine. You see these OEMs here, HP, Dell, Lenovo, SanDisk, etc. They all OEM that patented caching engine and put it into their workbooks and workstations and laptops. And the reason they do that is, again, because it's so intelligent, so smart, and so efficient that it's actually much better than whatever they might have developed, and they've developed a number of caching engines themselves. And you can appreciate the testing they put us through in order to OEM us. You don't see us because using OEM, you don't see our name. They have put their own on it. But the amount of testing that they put us through is significant to get there. In addition, we are, because of what we do in the Windows environment, we're a strong partner with Microsoft. And because of what we do in virtualized environments, we're a very close partner with VMware. And while we're speaking here about MEDITECH, there is additionally a new certification that we just recently acquired, and that's the Microsoft SQL Server I/O Reliability Certification. GQ and his team were the key players here to get us certified. GQ, you want to speak about that briefly?
Yeah, Dan, this is a nice elite certification. Microsoft has certain levels to reach to make sure that our products, third-party products, are fully compatible with theirs. And in this case, it's a Microsoft SQL Server. And we're the only software company to get this certification, but we're in good company with people like Dell, HP, and EMC. So not only did we have to go through some stringent testing, we also had to go face a board of SQL experts to make sure that our product was fully compatible with theirs. And so I consider this a nice elite certification, Dan.
Yeah, and congratulations and kudos to you and your team for being the first and only software company so far to certify their GQ. So thanks for that. So folks, let's talk about the technology and how we benefit MEDITECH and non-MEDITECH environments, but specifically MEDITECH today. You know, as soon as the world virtualized, and another reason why GQ, respun our software was to focus on all of the I/O issues that occur once an organization virtualizes their environment, and there are even issues if you're still on physical servers. But GQ, you want to talk about what happens to I/O in virtualized environments?
Yeah, let me just do this quickly here, and that is, there's two effects here. The first one is the Windows I/O tax, we call it, and that is on the Windows system, when a file gets created or extended, the Windows system tends to break it out into small random I/Os rather than a nice contiguous I/O. And the reason for that is the Windows system doesn't know how big that file is when it gets created, or how big if it's going to get extended, how big that extension is going to be. So it just looks for the next allocation. This is all happening on the Windows layer at the virtual machine. And if it doesn't fit in that next allocation, well, it has to go find another allocation, which is another I/O, and so forth and so forth. So that's why it breaks it down these small random I/Os. And then you get down to the hypervisor, and you got many virtual machines coming down to it. Well, then that has to try to handle all these small random I/Os, and you get this I/O blender effect, which Gartner helped us coin too. And it's just very inefficient. You're also not getting the optimal performance out of your storage too, because if you look at any storage vendor, they give you two benchmarks, one for sequential I/O and one for random I/O. And you'll always notice, and this is for hard disk drives, all flash arrays, that the sequential I/O always outperform the random I/O. So if you're getting all these random I/Os, it's very inefficient because all the extra handling it has to do, and you're not getting the best performance out of your storage. That's it in a nutshell, Dan.
Yeah, well, thank you, GQ. And given all of these issues around, extremely fragmented and random I/O is where we come into play here, trying to mitigate all of that occurring, again, in both your MEDITECH and in your non-MEDITECH environments. So here we've just taken a little snippet from the various MEDITECH service bulletins that talk about not only what happens, and this is really, really a Windows issue. It's not one that has to do specifically with anything MEDITECH did, but it has to do with around excessive fragmentation within NTFS, and specifically around the file attribute list. So, GQ, you want to speak briefly about that, and we'll continue on?
Sure, Dan. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about this issue here, this FAL issue. Now, you know, as you saw from the bulletins from MEDITECH and from Mr. Belkner there, they talk about this issue called the FAL issue. And what this FAL stands for is a file attribute list. And what it is it's a metadata structure in the Windows file system. As a file gets fragmented, it has to keep data on where each of those fragments is pointing to of the data on the volume. Of course, you know, when it's just a few fragments, it's very easy to keep track of them. But as files get very, very fragmented, the Windows file system creates this structure called the FAL, the file attribute list. And this list keeps track of all the fragments and where they're located. Now, this list, when it has to get created, I'm not just talking thousands of fragments. I'm talking millions of fragments. That's what this FAL can hold. Now, in Microsoft great wisdom, they set it to a fixed size because they didn't think any file would ever get that fragmented. And that fixed size, even though it's very large, and in this case I'm talking 3 to 4 million fragments, a problem occurs when you reach that limit. And that limit, when it's reached, if it's a folder file, no more files can get added under that folder. If it's a data file, no more data can get added to that data file. So you can see any applications that run in this issue will stop working. And we're talking, I know we're speaking about MEDITECH here, and it does happen on the MEDITECH processing. They've run into this, but we've also seen this on non-MEDITECH systems, on Exchange servers, Outlook, some SQL databases got very fragmented. So it's just not MEDITECH. We've seen it on other cases too. So what does this do? Of course, we've had a few cases, and that's why we were first called in, of people, the MEDITECH processing stopped working because it reached this limit here. Now, not only do you get this, but when you're talking about that much fragmentation, you're looking at that much extra IOs needed to read in that data. You know, even if it's not reaching that limit, what if just 1 million IOs rather than just 100 IOs to read that data? That's going to hurt performance. So what happened is, when MEDITECH ran into this, they approached Microsoft. Microsoft then recommended that they contact us. And the reason for that is that we worked very closely with Microsoft, and actually our team created the built-in defragmenter that comes with Windows. So we had a lot of experience on this. So,
yep, and then as a result of that, GQ and his team built in some special technology within our software to help mitigate that issue.
That's right, Dan. Now, you may think, why can't I just use any defragmenter? Well, we found some issues when we attacked this issue. Using the internal APIs within Windows to do the actual internal defragmentation can actually make the file size grow. Even though it's decreasing the number of fragments, it can make the file size grow. So that's the one limitation. And we solved that because we found a way to defragment it without making the file size grow. And that's why we're the only defragmenter to have this. There's one other defragment that tried to attack this problem, and their solution was this. It would defragment it, try and keep it, but once it reached a certain size, it stopped defragmenting that file because it knew it could grow the file and just warn the user. We're the only one that keep on defragmenting it and keep that file size in check. Now, the other limitation that we found is you would think, okay, I'm going to defragment it, I'll shrink that file size. Well, you can reduce the number of fragments, which will stem the growth, but doesn't shrink the growth. So that's what we do right online dynamically. By running our software, we stem that file size growth. Now, we've learned a lot of things since we first did this, and we just released a new version here. And this new version, it dynamically determines how often to run this special file defragment issue depending upon the file fragmentation severity. In our earlier versions, we would run at the most every 24 hours. What we found on some MEDITECH systems, that wasn't aggressive enough. So we may run more often, maybe every 2 hours if needed, if we found the file severity that bad. And that's what's new in this latest version. Also, one more, Dan. Also in this new version is we include some more free space consolidation engines. What we found on some of these MEDITECH volumes is that the free space fragmentation was extremely bad. And this is the same case, millions of free space fragmentation. And our current engines could not keep up with it. So our latest version had some new engines to keep up with it. Now, as I said, doesn't shrink the file. So right now, if you reach the file limit, the only way that you could shrink it was you had to take the system down, copy that file off that volume, delete that file off the original volume so it frees up the free space, reboot to reflush that free space cache on that volume, then copy that volume back on to that volume. Now, some of these files are extremely large, and that can take quite a while. And we know the MEDITECH sites, any hospital does not like to be down that often. And some of these files, which are gigabytes in size, can take hours to do, and you don't want to be down. So we developed another tool that comes with the product, and it's an offline FAL remediation tool. Yes, you still have to take your system down, and we usually do it during the maintenance periods, but our offline FAL remediation tools can shrink it in minutes rather than hours. And usually it's, in all the cases I've done with companies, it's usually around 3 to 5 minutes to actually do the shrinking. Okay. Now, one other thing that our latest product does is it doesn't require a reboot to install or update. Our previous ones did because it had some filter drivers, but we found a way to install or update the current versions without having to reboot. And we mainly did this for the MEDITECH sites because we know it's very hard for you to take your systems down to do these type of things. But we also found out many other customers really enjoy that feature of not having to reboot. Now, these features are both in our V-locity for virtual servers and Diskeeper for physical servers. I know we talked about that Windows I/O tax and I/O blender effect on the virtual environment, but that same thing happens. Those same restrictions happen on physical systems too. Well, Dan, I've talked a lot, and I just want to indicate to the I gave you a lot of data out there, so if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, GQ. And folks, GQ is pretty humble about, first of all, any and all of those attributes that you've seen for our solution for MEDITECH. But I have to mention it again. The ability to install our software in a live system without a reboot is just amazing. I had a customer last week just tell me he was amazed and said, that he has to reboot his system to get a print driver installed. So GQ and his engineering team, cracked the code, and we are upgrading and installing MEDITECH and non-MEDITECH customers on the fly without any hiccups whatsoever. It's really pretty amazing, and you'll see a comment from one of our customers later on here in the presentation. And again, everything that GQ mentioned here is all automated. There is nothing for you to do. The software installs in, I'll say 10 minutes. The longest time it takes to install is to download the software, and then you're off and running. And again, everything is fully automated. Just amazing. So if you recall that slide you saw before with all of those random I/O being generated in a virtualized environment, this is now what your environment would look like with our I/O optimization and I/O reduction software installed in the guest OS or on the physical server. So now you have nice, large, contiguous writes emanating out of the Windows OS, moving down to the hypervisor or to your local storage in a physical environment. And it's, again, virtualized, moving down to storage and back again. And we've eliminated, millions of those random I/Os in your environment. In the previous case where it may have taken 100,000 I/Os to write a gigabyte of data, in this situation with our I/O reduction software installed, it may take 50 or 60,000. So you can see, and just intuitively understand what that means to your environment. You can also even add more applications to your existing environment without having to add more expensive hardware, because we've given you the headroom through all of that I/O reduction. So, where is it that we sit? As I mentioned, we're two light filter drivers that sit up in the Windows OS on the guest machine in a virtualized environment, or in the OS on a physical machine. So if it's, again, a MEDITECH environment, we're agnostic to anything below the OS. If it's compatible with Windows, it's compatible with us. So anything hypervisor, server, HBAs, network, or storage is all, we're above all of that, optimizing I/O and using that patented caching engine to cache those reads, never having to have to take the trip down to storage and back again. So that's where we sit. Hopefully that gave you a little idea of where those filter drivers sit, and again, install without a reboot. GQ, I'm going to ask you to maybe talk about the two patented engines just a little bit more around what we do with IntelliWrite and IntelliMemory.
I'll be glad to, Dan, and I'll go, previously I talked about that Windows I/O tax, where Windows tends to break up I/Os into smaller random I/Os. And I like to give this analogy. If you're going to carry a gallon of water from one place to another, do you do it with 100 small Dixie cups, or do you do it with one big gallon bucket and do it all at one time? And that's basically what we're trying to enforce here. Nice sequential I/O. And I indicated the file system doesn't know when a file gets created or extended how big it's going to be, so it doesn't know to go look for the best allocation. So we're doing something very simple. In the background, we're looking at the activity on your system and see, certain file types or certain application, when a file gets extended or created, how big it's going to be. And we feed that data back to the file system. So when a file gets created or extended, it now knows to look for the best allocation, and that causes a nice sequential I/O. That simple. That's it for this one, Dan. And then our other one is our caching technology. And as Dan indicated earlier, 9 out of the top 10 PC OEMs actually license our technology. So it's a nice accolade on there. And the reason for it is we're very unique in our technology. There's two main things. One is how we use memory. In most other caching products, you may have to just allocate memory for it to use as its cache. We will only use what's available or what's being unused by the system for caching. And then if any user or system process needs it, we'll automatically, dynamically give it up so there's never any memory contention issues. And of course, if there's not enough available memory, we won't be doing the caching. Now, so you don't have to go allocate memory for us. We'll just use what's available. The second thing that's very unique about us is that we will, how we determine what to put in cache and what to keep in cache to get the optimal performance. I mean, many other caching products are very simple. They said, oh, this data was just read in. Let me put it in cache and hope that it gets read in again so I could satisfy it. But what we do is we go and we're mining the system background. We determine, one, what data is getting access the most, and that's one criteria. The other criteria is what data will give you the best performance gains. And what we found out, it's these small little IOs that is hurting performance more than the large sequential IO that's getting read in. So we factor that in and determine that will give you better performance. And what this does by caching that data is when on the machine, on the applications that actually create that IO, we can satisfy that read IOs right there at the machine level. Therefore, that IO doesn't have to go down to the network, doesn't have to go down to the network storage to get satisfied. So it very quickly satisfies that IO. And even if you have flash, all flash array, you gotta remember that the DRAM on your system is about 10 to 15 times faster than your all flash array. So you'll get optimal response times from that. Now, you'll also reduce the bandwidth that's going across the network to that storage. So you increase the bandwidth of other systems using that network and storage. So there's another nice advantage to that too. So thanks, Dan, for letting me, I get a little long-winded talking about technical. Sorry about that.
No, not at all, GQ. And again, it's important. So folks, as you can see, two filter drivers were, well, rather simplistic to understand, doing an awful lot of work. And oh, by the way, you won't even see us much in your task manager from a CPU utilization, et cetera, because GQ and his team also developed another patented technology called invisitasking, which has us doing most of our work using idle CPU time. So using idle CPU time to do our jobs, using idle DRAM to cache hot reads, all fully automated. Really pretty amazing what they've accomplished. Just wanted to share a couple examples here. One, Hancock Regional. Before installing us, they were loading 2 patient records in 7 seconds. After just installing our software, fully automated, it went to 6 patient records in 4 seconds, a 3x improvement. I mean, pretty significant. Even more so, and this is an account that GQ has a weekly call with, but CHRISTUS Health is one of the largest healthcare institutions in the state of Texas. They virtualized. They had performance issues right after virtualizing. They were about ready to spend $2 million to upgrade their NetApp storage environment. They had been a Diskeeper customer. They heard about V-locity, so they installed V-locity, and they were able to defer that $2 million PO after putting V-locity into their environment. We doubled the performance of, again, their patient record application, so you can see that's a big benefit that healthcare institutions are seeing using our software. And look what happened with the billing batch jobs. I mean, just dramatic results. And not only in MEDITECH environments, but also, folks, as I've mentioned, this also applies to non-MEDITECH environments, SQL, SharePoint, Exchange, all of your Windows-based applications. Folks are seeing incredible performance improvements and I/O reductions in using those in those other Microsoft-based environments also. Did want to share with you, as I said, what CHRISTUS had to say about the latest release, having no reboots required to upgrade the software in their environment. They have us on around 2,700 servers in their environment, been able to upgrade all of those without a reboot. Just significant time savings and benefit improvements in their environment. And they're not the only one, but again, wanted to share with you what they had to say about the latest release that GQ and his team have put together. So with that, again, I wanted to mention that, you'll be receiving a NFR, not for resale, copy of our V-locity per server software. So put it on, one of your VMs and give it time for all of the algorithms to learn the application, and then take a look see what the dashboard will reveal to you about what's happening with your software. Now, while it's great to install us on a single VM, as you saw before in the pictures, if you recall, multiple VMs on a host, each one is generating a lot of small, random, noisy I/O. By optimizing one of however many are on one host, that optimization tends to get degraded by all of the other hosts not being optimized and generating all of that random I/O. So we're happy to work with you. We have a host-based license that covers all of the VMs on that particular host. And we have a V-locity management console that allows you to deploy very simply and easily using the console, and also to view what's happening with each of those VMs. So again, happy to let you try the software for free across multiple VMs. That's what we do every day, because what happens in your environment is really, what's important to each of you, as opposed to hearing about CHRISTUS or Hancock Regional or the hundreds of other hospitals that we're installed in. So happy to work with you on any and all of those. So with that, GQ, what kind of questions do we have out there?
I got a few questions out here, Dan, but one thing I do want to indicate, if you're putting this on an EMR or MAT server, we do recommend disabling the MediWrite feature. And the reason for that is, on those MAT and EMR server, it creates a lot of small little files that never grow, and in other words, they never fragment. So it's just a little overhead just trying to check all those files to see, can I make these contiguous? So, and when I am talking a lot of small files, those are usually the millions. I'm talking millions of small files. So in those cases, we do recommend disabling the MediWrite on those specific file server types. Now, I do have someone asking, Dan, and this will go back to you, is how's this software licensed?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, GQ. So as I mentioned, there are two licensing models. One is per server, so either per VM, the virtualized environment, or per physical server in a physical environment. But as VMs grow, and as you see all of that random I/O being generated by all the VMs on a host, we strongly recommend, and we have a host-based model, and that singular license covers all the VMs on the host. So whether they're 5 or 15 or 20, they're all covered by that single license. And all of our licenses, whether per server or per host, are all perpetual licenses. So there's a one-time purchase of the license, and then it's just ongoing maintenance. And we also offer maintenance. Many of our MEDITECH customers are on a 5-year maintenance window, and we offer maintenance from 1 year up to 5 years to meet those needs that you have relative to your maintenance environments. So I hope that answered that, GQ.
Thank you, Dan. That was great. I have another question about the caching, and they're worried about how safe is this caching? What if the system goes down? How safe is my data? And good question here. And data integrity was our number one goal when we developed our technology. Our caching is a read-only cache. That means that we only satisfy reads from that cache. That data that's in cache, it's already on your storage. So what happens if the system goes down? That data is already on your storage. It's still safe. So good question on that. Another person here asks, how do I know if I have a FAL issue? I have to tell you, when we first were approached by MEDITECH and we started looking at some companies that were reaching the FAL limit, we thought it took years to reach this FAL size. And in some cases it did. Some of these systems had been up for years before they reached it. But then we started running into a few systems that were just put up 3 to 4 months earlier, and just because of that I/O activity, and also another thing that we saw was amount of free space that is on the volumes. That can affect it. If there's very little free space, the fragmentation rate will grow quite a bit. Now, MEDITECH recommends at least 20% free space on the volumes, and that's usually volume E. And we concur with them. We recommend that too. One case with one company, I saw the free space go down to less than 2%. And of course, the free space rate grew quickly on that system. And then because the free space is very fragmented, the data got very fragmented, and the FAL size rate grew quite a bit. But how do you know you have FAL issue? There's a couple ways. MEDITECH actually has a tool called the FAL Info Utility that you could get, and you can run that to see, are there any FALs greater than 50% of the max size, things like that. So you can contact your MEDITECH TAM on that. And then we also have some utilities here, so if you would contact your sales rep, put you in touch with the sales engineer, they could help see what your FAL situation is.
GQ, I do want to mention to everybody, and since as you worked with MEDITECH for years, and we met with them just last December up in Massachusetts, that they how do I say it, GQ, strongly recommend that everyone have a fragmentation plan in place. That is, having, I'll say, our software installed, whether there's a FAL issue today or not, to prevent that from occurring and also optimize performance in the environment.
You're absolutely right, Dan. They recommend on the file servers to make sure that this situation doesn't occur. So having our software helps prevent it from occurring in the future. You're correct.
Yep. At a minimum, it's the file servers, transaction servers, data repository servers, and the scanning and archive volumes at a minimum.
Correct. Dan, And then I have one last question, and they're asking, does this software get installed on the host or the guest? Actually, our software gets installed right on the actual physical machines or virtual machines running the Windows platform. And further, is it required to be installed on every VM under a host? No, it's not required. You just install it on the specific machines. Although we do recommend, and especially if you buy a host license, put on all the virtual machines under that host, because as indicated, even though you optimize one system, you still have other systems causing bandwidth issues to the storage. So this will help the whole situation by decreasing the bandwidth of that network and to the storage. Dan,
Great.
that's all I see right now. But of course, if there's any other questions later, just send it into a sales rep here, and we'll get it answered for you.
Absolutely. GQ, thanks very much for taking the time out to speak to the folks today. And again, thanks for all your efforts in developing and improving the software over the decades that you've been here, and even for the latest no reboot release, et cetera. So really impressive. So thank you.
Hey, Dan, I hate to interrupt you, but Luke just came up with a question, and I want to just answer him back. He asked, will this cause thin provision disk to grow? And that's a good question, Luke, because usually SANs with thin provisioning, with deduplication, all these other types of features, they don't recommend running a defragmenter on those because it could cause those thin provision disks to grow. And the reason why is when you go and defrag something, it doesn't know that the data didn't change. Well, we actually developed this. One thing is the MediWrite technology, and that helps prevent the fragmentation from occurring. And I actually went to some of the SAN vendors and proved that this does, with that technology, it prevented the thin provisioning disk not to grow. And it's the same thing with data duplication and the other technologies. We also look at when we do have to defragment it, is it causing a performance issue? A couple things. One, the old defragmenters used to just say, hey, let me just defragment everything. We now look to say, is that fragmentation causing an issue? Is it causing a performance issue? If not, then don't defragment it. Also, big fragments, and I'm taking a very out of the box example here. Let's say you have a gigabyte, it's 2 pieces. No, it's not worth defragmenting that. That's not going to do it. And we've become very smart on what we do to prevent the thin provisioning disk to grow. So good question, Luke. Okay, Dan, that's it.
No, thanks, GQ. And again, Luke, we're up in the OS preventing that fragmentation from occurring, at the onset. So that's really where we're focusing a lot of our effort here, for sure. Again, thanks, GQ. Thank you, folks. Great questions. Appreciate it. Look for that email from us with the NFR, and we're happy to work with you as we do with the hundreds of MEDITECH customers, actually worldwide, that we do, both in the U.S., Canada, and across the world, as I mentioned, in helping them manage their environment, have the most efficient I/O possible, and just run as efficiently as they can. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, everybody.